What's going on, crew? Hope you guys are doing well. Welcome to another edition of the show today, Clinic Grow Secrets. I'm recording this on Memorial Day. Happy Memorial Day if you're listening. And I spent a lot of my day today thinking about my grandfather. He was actually in World War II as a radio operator. He served on a B-29 bomber. They flew over to Japan for a long while. They were stationed in Guam. Some of the stories that that man has surrounding that experience are absolutely insane. Some stuff that I think a lot of us couldn't even imagine going through, to be honest with you. And so, great generation. If you're a listener of the show and you've served yourself, or maybe you're possibly listening and you're actively on duty, I salute you. I thank you, and I appreciate you for tuning into the show today and giving me some of your attention on this wonderful holiday. Um, I think a note of Memorial Day, when I think about the stories of people that I love, including my grandfather, I also think about the stories that I tell myself. And one of the things that I found to be true about business in general and just life is that the person that you are best at lying to is yourself, because we know exactly what we need to hear in order for us to give ourselves a pass, to get ourselves out of it, to give ourselves that excuse. And so what I wanted to do was talk about a few of those stories that I have told myself that have been very, very self-limiting. And then I also want to just talk about a few stories that I hear our clinicians, our chiropractors talk about inside of our groups. Again, just stories that they tell themselves that a lot of times are just simply not true or don't match the facts of a marketplace. I just want to highlight a few because if there could be a few stories that you may possibly be telling yourself that are really, really limiting the impact you're able to have. And so I just want to talk about some of those that have been influenced by me, and I'm hoping that you guys can get some value from it too. The first limiting belief or limiting story that we tell ourselves is that nobody can do it like me. That is a very, very common thing in entrepreneurship, inside and outside of chiropractic. The fact of the matter is, first and foremost, as we talk about that, it's kind of an interesting thing that nobody can do it like me. Because if we think about it on paper and factually, every person in the workforce gets replaced every 100 years. And if you live longer than 100, then sure, you might every 110 years, right? Because you're going to die. And so if everybody is replaced every 100 years, what that ultimately means is that what I'm doing today, more than likely, to a certain capacity, people have done before me. And also what I'm doing today, people will long do after I'm gone into the future. And so it's actually a very freeing belief, because then you realize that you are not necessarily like, you're not limited in yourself. You don't have to take ownership of every single tactical thing in your business, because once you say that nobody can do it like me, what happens then is that we give ourselves that excuse to not delegate stuff, to not hire, to not fill needs, to just kind of own everything tactically in terms of how to run the organization of a business or anything of that matter. And to a certain degree, that's okay. Like if you're listening and you're like, hey man, I'm a solo clinician and I like it that way, I don't want teammates, then more power to you. Okay. That's your mission, your journey, and I'm not changing that. What I will say is that if you have a vision of having like a lot of impact in an organization in terms of like patients served, cash flow, volume, all the kind of stuff that comes with running a large organization, then we have to slowly let that belief slide away. Because again, if we have the idea that nobody can do it like me, then we have to take extreme ownership of all the tactical things that happen in a business. And then we just cannot prioritize our personal time to work on the needle moving things, because we're just so in the weeds working on all the stuff. Because again, why? Nobody can do it like me. So the first thing to consider is that we have to, again, if the impact needs to be expanded, we have to actually reverse engineer our thinking throughout each individual stage of a business. When you're in the infancy stage of a company, okay, let's define infancy as, 0 to 20 to maybe $30,000 a month. That's infancy stage for sure. You are doing everything, right? At least in the very beginning, at least 0 to 20,000, more than likely, you're doing most things in your office, right? You're adjusting, you're doing the billing, you're making sure the finances are coming in, you're doing all the patient care, you're doing all of the marketing, all the sales, all of the necessary like payments in terms of vendors and paying rent, paying taxes. You're everything. Like you're doing the whole farm. And so that mentality, you kind of earn your stripes during that phase. I used to call that phase the eye of the tiger. It's just really just like the bullish push, how bad you want it phase of business. And so you really earn your stripes. And because you earn your stripes, you become attached to the things that you do. And that's where that's where that belief system comes from, is that because you were wearing all these hats, you've got these predefined systems of how to run the finance and how to do the patient care and how to do the report of findings. And you're just kind of attached to that. And because you created it from scratch, you believe that nobody else can operate it like you. And so the first thing is, again, like we have to accept the fact that number one, everyone can not everyone, but there are people that can do things like us, number one. And we have to be able to bring them into the organization to really expand. And so this really becomes hyper prevalent when it comes time to getting a second doctor in the organization, because we're concerned that patients are not going to like the way the other chiropractor adjusts them. And there's going to be some friction with that process. And let me tell you that is 100% true. There will be some friction. However, it's a price that you have to pay to go to the next level. That's the tuition price of going to the next level in your practice. And if you're willing to pay that, then you can go to the next level. If you're not, then you can just pretend like you want to go to the next level, but you're not going to get there because you're not willing to pay the price. Okay. You're not willing to pay tuition. So let's do something hypothetical here, is that even if you are clinically proven, factually proven to be the best adjuster on planet Earth, that will still, if your vision is to have a massive impact and as many people as possible, then that fact will still be limiting you. Because again, you will not be able to then coach and train others over a prolonged period of time to develop similar deliverable skills as you to the patient. Okay. Because if you put all the best adjusters in the world, five of the best adjusters in the world, and you gave them all a random sample size of patients, my bet would be that those patients at the end of the day, in terms of outcome and how they feel after the adjustment, the top five best adjusters, they would probably say, hey, they were all really good. They were all acceptable. They were all good. Because the patient, they're not probably going to be able to determine the best of the best versus someone who's just damn good, right? And that's a thought that we have to just look at, because again, it helps with scale. And again, if your vision is not to scale, then that's fine. And if you're like, hey man, like nobody still after listening to this, Jeff, like nobody can do it like me. I refuse to let my patients get adjusted by somebody else. That's cool. I'm not trying to change that by any means. But again, if you want to go to the next level, we have to be able to say, hey, I'm good at what I do in terms of adjusting patients, but I can definitely find somebody and train somebody up to speed to be as acceptable in terms of deliverable to my patients as me, right? So that's the first limiting belief, is nobody can do it like me in a clinical setting. Again, becomes more challenging when you're trying to basically duplicate the adjustment, adding another chiropractor to the office. Second limiting belief is that people just don't want to work. Okay. So I can't find team because people just don't want to work, or people don't stay. I can't get employees to stay. Nobody just wants to work. Okay. That's the story we say. Hey man, it's all good that that person just left the organization, or it's all good that it's really hard for me to like hire people. People just don't want to work. Again, those are the five words. There's six words that we tell ourselves to just give us that excuse out. And so maybe it's true. I like to take the stoic approach. Like, hey man, like maybe it's true. Maybe you're right. Maybe nobody does that want to work. However, I think a better frame would be, how can we reverse engineer what motivates people and what motivates today's generation to incorporate that in the business? That would be the first thing. The second thing would be, how do we find players that are possibly already working? So I want to give a hyper tactical thing here, is that a lot of people use the funnel. They basically go, hey, let's use Indeed, ZipRecruiter, Monster, that kind of stuff to funnel a bunch of applicants in, and then we'll sort through them. Super viable, 100% viable process. You'll get a lot of volume, and then you got to have a good filtration process and screening process to where you as the executive don't have to get on the phone with a lot of random people who just don't fit the bill. So you got to have a good screening process, but viable. Okay. Now, the thing about that screening process is it takes a long time to develop, and it takes a lot of volume to sort through. So one thing that you can do to kind of add on to your system is add in applications. So people have to fill out, 5 to 10 question applications, and then you can just read the words to determine if it's worth having a phone conversation. Okay. The second thing would be to use a more direct outreach approach. One of the strategies with that is you can use LinkedIn. And let's say that you're a chiropractor in Cincinnati and you're looking for an office manager. What you can do is you can go on LinkedIn, filter by Cincinnati, people in Cincinnati, second connections, so people that you're not connected to. And then what you can do, and then you can search office manager in addition to Cincinnati. So you'll put like Cincinnati and office manager. And then what'll happen is now you'll find a laundry list of people that live in your area, so then they can effectively work for you. They're not living in Alaska, they live in Cincinnati. And now we know that they're also working as an office manager. So we've done two things is we found people who are already working, number one, and two is they're already working in a similar position, which means they likely enjoy that work, or they're more likely to enjoy the work of the office manager since they're already doing it. Okay. Now what we need to do is we need to get our message in front of those people and try to present them with a better opportunity to come and work for our organization versus the organization that they're currently working at. And it's a very viable approach because you'd be surprised. I think the last time I looked at it was like 60 to 70% of people are open to exploring a different work opportunity. So we need to capitalize on that. Maybe we can present them a better opportunity. And then when we do get them in the organization, we need to figure out what motivates them. Okay, because you might be motivated by patient volume and cash flow. But the person who you work for, they might be motivated, sure, by money, but their really motivation is they want the money so that they can build a house for their family because they want to live in a nice neighborhood that their kids can go to good public schools at, right? So we got to figure out what motivates them. And then what we want to do ultimately is build the organization to a certain size and volume in terms of cash flow that we're able to support the vision of the employees in the business. And so if the CA wants that $500,000 home in a nice neighborhood with great public schools, then we need to be able to help her achieve that dream while working in our business. Our business needs to be the vehicle of her achieving that dream, him or her. And if they believe that, hey, if I work for Dr. John in this practice, I will be able to get that $500,000 home someday if I just work hard. That's going to keep them motivated in the game. If they look around and they say, hey, man, like Dr. John, he's not really here a lot. He's traveling. He's all over the place. He's kind of like, man. They might be like, hey, man, like this is a good temporary place, but I'm going to keep my options open because I'm not so sure if my vision is going to be able to come true here. And I got stuff I want to do in this life and I need to get there. You know what I mean? So they're looking at you as the owner to make sure that you're building the organization. Your vision is big enough that they can now achieve their personal vision while being a contributing member to the organization. Okay. Now, I know I just gave you a lot there, but that's the whole different frame from people just don't want to work, which is, again, that's that story that we tell ourselves that ultimately produces zero upside because it basically gives us the way out, right? Where again, the the person we're best at lying to is ourselves, right? The third, this is going to be 3 of 4. I got one more after this one. This one's tactical, hyper tactical for offices, especially cash-based facilities. I was on the call with a chiropractor probably about 2 weeks ago. And in the conversation, one of the things that came up was the business model. I always ask about how the docs are doing business, right? For context, we run Clinic Growth Accelerator. It's a cash-based approach. And so all of our docs are subluxation based for the most part. We do cash-based services, meaning we teach our docs how to do pay in fulls, monthly payment plans, typically high volume wellness facilities. We got guys that see, 1,200 people a week in the program, all the way down to maybe 150 to 200, And so when I talk to people, one of the first things I want to make sure is that what's the business model like? Because our particular program is not really designed well for a really insurance-based approach. And that doesn't mean that some of our offices don't take insurance, but that largely means that we want to sell cash-based services because that's just what works best in the program. And so with that context, I was talking to a gentleman about his business model, and he was running a pay-per-visit type style practice. And I kind of inquired about that. I was like, hey, is that a model you've been doing for a long time? Like, talk to me a little bit about that. And he said, I've considered changing to the care plan model. However, other offices have left a bad taste in the market's mouth when it comes to pay in full services. Got it. Okay, so to back up, this basically story is I can't do pay in full cash-based chiropractic services, care plans, because other doctors have offered those in my market. The market has been burned. They've had a bad experience by that. And now I can't offer that because they've already had the bad experience with the other doctor. Okay. So that's the mindset. Stoic mindset. Okay. Could be true. Very possibly could be true. If you live in a town of 200 people, there's a shot that that's true. Okay. For the large majority of us, I think it's best to assume that it's untrue. Not for the sake of that might not be a few people on the beach that said, hey man, like, out of all the people that I've served, there's been a few people that had bad experience. I guarantee that. Okay. Now, what I would say is that the person I was talking to, his neighborhood, his population in terms of city was 200,000 people. 200,000. And according to that, all of them have had a bad taste in his mouth, which completely changes how he must run his practice now. So let's think about that just as like if it were true, then okay, how can we test the validity of that? The first thing would be to random sample people. Okay, that if we want to understand the how a population is likely to perform, then we can interview a small sample size and get an understanding of what the entire population may look like as long as that sample size is big enough, right? Basic statistics. And so let's assume that we ask 100 people on the street. Hey, we go around, we interview. Question for you. Have you been burned or has a bad taste been left in your mouth surrounding pay in full care plans at a chiropractic office? If you ask 100 people that. Now, with the amount of people that we've talked to in chiropractic, I don't know what this data would support, but my guess would be the following. I bet that 50 people, at least half out of the gate, would not even know what a care plan was. And we would have to actually then define further what a care plan is so that they could even understand what the initial intent of the question was. That's the first 50 are gone. They like never don't even know what a care plan is. Okay. So they're still on the table as viable business. The remaining 50, 25 of those people may have gone to a chiropractor, but I would guess they probably did pay per service. And that's all they know. That's all they know a chiropractor to be. Again, they didn't know what a care plan was. So they just say, hey, man, I've been to the chiropractor, but my doc, he just does pay per visit, right? The remaining 25 of the 100 people, they may, and I'm being like probably conservative here. I'm actually probably being not conservative here. I would bet it would even be smaller than 25 out of 100 people have done some level of a care plan and I've had a good experience or a bad experience. I bet all 25 have not had a bad or not all 25 have had a good. It's going to be somewhere in the middle, right? So what that basically means is that out of 100 people we surveyed, the likelihood is that maybe 10 people, 10%, maybe that would even be high out of a 200,000 marketplace. 10% of the people have had a bad experience with pay in full, which ultimately likely means that we probably shouldn't design our whole business model around the 10%. We should design our business model around the other 90% who have either not been to a chiropractor or have gone to a chiropractor and have done pay per visit, but have not had a bad taste in their mouth when it comes to care plans. They just haven't been offered that before, right? So again, that's another story that we tell ourselves as a very hyper tactical example that just limits us at the door. Like the business had no chance of growing and changing the business model. Like if this doc wanted to do pay in full, like they might go home and they might want to do pay in full. They just truly believe their marketplace won't accept that. That becomes just the most destroying story that we could ever tell ourselves because again, like we're limited at the door. Like we'll never even try out the business model because we already believe the marketplace has already hated it, you know? The last story is just surrounding sales. And it was a personal limiting belief of mine for a long time, a story that I told myself, and it's surrounding price is that people are just not willing to pay above X in my market, or people just won't pay Y in my market, similar to that pay in full, but just mostly what you can charge for service, right? So here's what I found about just sales in general, especially for cash-based facilities. If the care plan is $4,000 for easy math, 4 grand, the consumer is going to complain it's too expensive. If the care plan is $3,000, the consumer and the patient is going to complain it's too expensive in a lot of cases. If it's 2,000, they're going to complain it's too expensive. It's 1,000, they're going to complain it's too expensive. And so the reality is it's like it's always going to be too much for the consumer, right? And so if you are one of those people that you walk around and you're a listener of the show and you're listening today and you walk around and you think in every single transaction that I have with somebody, either I'm getting screwed and not getting the deal, or they're getting screwed and not getting the deal, then that's where that belief system comes from. Because what happens is that anytime you get some sort of price resistance when you present your care, you validate that resistance because you might actually think it's too much money. Because your own personal money belief says that I wouldn't pay 4 grand for this. I wouldn't pay 2 grand for this. So then it's back to the conviction, right? And so for the longest time, like our CGA, like when we first started, like the program was like $500. You know what I mean? Like we used to teach people how to do it. We'll teach you how to do it. It's like $500. You got to pay your own ad spend, but it's 500. I was like, dude, there's no way they're gonna pay $1,000, man. And then it's same with the chiropractor. It was like, hey, like we'll start out at 10 visit. There's no way they're gonna pay 600. They get the first payment, they're like, oh my gosh, can't believe they paid 600. So I think like just really at least like doing some market research to understand like not so much like what other chiropractors are charging, but like what the market is capable of paying based on affluency. That's going to be really helpful. We got some docs in our program that their household income for two people is $45,000 a year. It's a very, very non-affluent place, and they're still charging $2,000 for their care. So again, they just want to make sure you're not limiting the practice by what you believe in terms of the marketplace. You always want to just use data as the North Star when you can. And so start by looking up household income, start by looking and figuring out like what are other offices charging? And then ideally, you want to be a little bit higher than that because you want to be able to demonstrate more value. You want to be able to have a little bit stickier of a practice. And, at the end of the day, like you don't want everybody, you only want patients that are going to be able to make sense of what you want to deliver. And so we have to consider the harmony triangle, which is that if the practice is it has to be in alignment with yourself, the business, and the patients. And so if the practice is all pay per service, it's very in alignment with the patient because there's no risk. They just pay every time they need to see you. But then all that risk gets transitioned to the business because now your business has a high churn rate. It's not very sticky. You never know when you're going to see somebody again. And so you have to balance a business model that's both in alignment for the patients, the business, and yourself. And somewhere in the middle, you're going to find that harmonious balance of like, the patients are getting great care, we're making good money, and I'm feeling really good about the service I'm delivering. And that should be your goal to get there. And so those are some of the stories that we tell ourselves, because people don't want to work, nobody can do it like me, I can't do pay in fulls, or my office, like people in my market won't pay that price for care. I would encourage you to always be doing a level of testing in your office, test the validity of some of the stories that you're telling yourself. And honestly, like even just be naive to your own stories. Like if you know that you tell yourself a certain story, my challenge would be for the next 30 days, try to operate with a story that's the exact opposite of what you believe, and then see if you can either like completely disprove or even maybe you possibly validate a story. But make sure you use an unbiased approach. You completely do the opposite of what you're doing today in terms of certain stories, and you see what the outcome comes from. Nobody can do it like me. Maybe you try bringing another chiropractor. Maybe you start pre-framing your patients. Hey, like we're going to be bringing in another doctor. You're going to absolutely love them. Maybe try finding people on LinkedIn that are already working in particular places, and then just asking them like, hey, like I really want to make sure this relationship's long. Like, what do I got to do to make you happy while you're working at this business? Like, try different things. And what I think you'll find is that the stories that you tell yourself can oftentimes be very limiting. So hopefully that's helpful, guys. It was a little bit of a thought process today in terms of I was thinking about the stories of my grandfather that he used to tell about his time in the war. And I was like, man, there's really just no excuse for telling ourselves stories and just kind of giving ourselves the easy way out, the easy pass. So I hope it's been helpful and looking forward to seeing you guys in the next episode. And as always, if you got value from today, hit that share button. Somebody maybe who's a colleague that's got some limiting beliefs they need to get over. Send this to them. I hope it'll be valuable for them as well as yourself. And we'll see you guys in the next one.